There's usually a thin line between good and evil that can be hard to see for so many people, and by the time they usually do realize it, they're at a point of no return. Take for example, a character named Walter White from the show Breaking Bad. He started off only wanting to sell drugs in order to help his family get by before he died from cancer. But as time continued, it was no longer about helping his family. It became about power and becoming the best there was in the game that he was in. Many people would like to think they wouldn't make the bad decisions that Walter White made, but would they really? Which then makes you think of the big question many people are afraid to honestly answer, which is, what is our breaking point before we switch from good to evil? And in the book, The Lucifer Effect by Philip Zimbardo, he talks about how you may not be as righteous as you think you are, and he identifies the thin line between what makes a person good and evil. You see, in the Bible, Lucifer was one of God's favorite angels, but after rebelling against him, he was then punished and sent to hell. And there, he became known as Satan, and the face of evil itself. And this is what is known as the Lucifer effect. This is when the idea of anyone, including angels, can turn evil under the right circumstances. But situations like this doesn't just occur on television or in the Bible. This is a situation that can even affect normal, everyday people, causing your typical average Joe to do unthinkable things under the right circumstances. If you're familiar with the story Batman, there's a character who goes by the name Joker, and there's a famous line he often quotes, which is, all it takes is one bad day to turn someone's life upside down. And to some degree, he would be correct. It seems like most people do have their breaking point. Of course, we would like to imagine we will always take the high route and do what's right. But life isn't that simple, and sometimes we're forced to make critical decisions under pressure. Men and women can become monsters by situations outside of their control. A man might be forced to turn to a life of crime in order to financially support his family, and a woman might throw everything she believes right out the window in order to feed her baby. The point is, life is messy. But as messy as life gets, Zimbardo, the author of The Lucifer Effect, explains that although we are capable of doing terrible things, we also have the power to teach ourselves to be heroes as well. People like to think that humans fall into two categories. You're either good or evil. But it's not that simple. People aren't static because they change all the time. People change as they age, where they live, and people they surround themselves by. Keep in mind, everyone's character is changeable, and how you behave really depends on what situation you're placed in. Take for example, the Milgram Experiment, which is mentioned in the book. In that experiment, participants were told that they would be part of a study to improve memory, and in this study, subjects were told that they would play the teacher's role, whose job was to help the learner memorize word pairs. But the thing the learners didn't know was that those learners were only actors. Now every time the learner would make a mistake, the teacher had permission to push a button to punish them with an electric shock. And for each additional mistake, the shock volume would increase. The reason they would increase the voltage would be so that the learner would act more and more distressed, and the pain would motivate them to make less mistakes. Now what was interesting was that despite how much the learner had pretended to be in pain, most of the teachers kept on increasing the shock level. By the end of the experiment, 65% of the participants gave the learner the maximum voltage, which was life-threatening, by the way. These people weren't all bad people though, but the studies showed that under the right circumstances, even ordinary people could do terrible things. There's another experiment that you may know of too, called the Stanford Prison Experiment. This too showed just how quickly ordinary people could be driven to do evil things. It was actually the author himself, Philip Zimbardo, conducted this experiment while at Stanford University. The idea was to put students in a mock prison and study their behavior, where some would be assigned as guards and others as prisoners. To keep the experiment balanced, all the students came from similar middle-class backgrounds and had no record of psychological impairment or criminal history. The students who played as guards were given uniforms and wooden batons, as the students who played as the prisoners were stripped naked and assigned a number instead of a name, and placed in a small cell. Now what was shocking about this experiment was just how quickly things got out of hand. You see, after a prisoner had disobeyed a guard's order, the guard retaliated by attacking him with a fire extinguisher. Soon, the guards would then start to degrade the prisoners and force them to defecate in a bucket in their cell. Not to mention, the guards also confiscated the prisoners' clothes and mattresses, forcing them to sleep on the cold ground. The experiment was originally supposed to be for just 2 weeks, but it had to be called off after 6 days. Just imagine how crazy things would have gotten if they actually completed the 2-week experiment. Someone would have probably died. And you're probably now thinking that deep inside all of us is a demon waiting to be released, and there's nothing we can do about it. But Zimbardo teaches you in the book that just because we have the capability to become evil, that doesn't mean we have to give in to those urges. And it starts with practicing being responsible for all of your decisions, even when no one is watching you. Next, if you feel like you're under an authority that is being unjust, stop following what they say. Just like how the participants in the Milgram Experiment didn't refuse to increase the voltage after being told to by authority figures, despite the fact that it was endangering the learners' lives, you too can have the courage to say no whenever you feel like it's necessary. People aren't perfect, and just because someone has authority over you doesn't mean that they're always correct. Zimbardo teaches you that we can all be a hero by not just resisting evil, but staying with our own ideology of what we deem as good. Instead of blindly following orders, understand why you follow those orders and make a decision for yourself. I recommend checking out the book, The Lucifer Effect, if you're into dark psychology and dark human nature. And if you have any books that you'd like for me to review, just let me know in the comments below.